When the desert shows no mercy, the Arizona sun hangs like a blazing coin in the cloudless sky. Its heat so intense, it seems to press down on the earth with physical weight. The thermometer reads 115 degrees in the shade, but there is no shade. For miles across the endless expanse of red rock, sand, and scattered sagebrush that stretches to every horizon, the merchant caravan, led by Wade Garrett, crawls across this wasteland like a wounded snake, 17 wagons and 43 souls, enduring what feels like a journey through the gates of hell itself. Dust clouds billow behind the wheels, coating everything and everyone in a fine layer of grit that turns to mud when mixed with sweat. Ezra Whitman sits hunched in the back of wagon number 12, his weathered hands gripping the wooden sides, as the vehicle lurches over the rocky terrain. At 67, the former preacher has seen his share of hardships, but nothing has prepared him for this furnace that Arizona calls summer. His gray hair is plastered to his skull with perspiration, and his simple black suit, the only good clothes he owns, has become a prison of soaked wool. Every breath feels like inhaling fire, and his water ration for the day was consumed hours ago when the sun was still climbing toward its merciless peak. How much further to the next water stop? Gasps Mrs. Henderson, a widow traveling with her teenage son in the same wagon. Her face is flushed red beneath her bonnet, and her boy, Tommy, looks dangerously pale. Garrett says another 6 hours, replies Jakob, a German immigrant whose English is broken, but whose concern is universal. But he say that 3 hours ago, yeah? Ezra closes his eyes and tries to pray, but even his thoughts feel sluggish in the yes. Heat. He's using the last of his savings money he'd hoped would last him the rest of his short life to reach his sister's family in Los Angeles. At his age, with his weak heart, this journey is probably madness. But loneliness is a slow death, and he'd rather die trying to reach the people he loves than waste away alone in a boarding house in Kansas. 3 wagons ahead, Elizabeth Morrison rides in considerably more comfort, though she's careful not to show it. Her wagon has a canvas canopy for shade, extra water barrels, and cushioned seats, luxuries that her traveling companion, Miss Sarah Collins, has allegedly purchased with family money from back east. In reality, Elizabeth is the daughter of Chicago banking magnate Charles Morrison, traveling under a false name to escape an arranged marriage to a man twice her age. Her father's money has bought her comfort and safety, but it's also given her a clear view of how the less fortunate passengers are being treated. She's been watching Wade Garrett's operation for 3 days now, and what she's seen has turned her stomach. The man charges desperate families everything they have for passage west, and provides the bare minimum of food, water, and protection. He pushes the pace relentlessly, caring nothing for the elderly, the sick, or the children who struggle to keep up. Miss Collins calls her hired companion and chaperone, Margaret Wells, a practical woman in her 40s, who's been paid handsomely to ask no questions about her employer's true identity. Perhaps you should rest in the shade. This heat is unseemly for a lady of your ... station. Elizabeth wipes the sweat from her brow and continues watching the suffering around her. I'm fine, Margaret, though I confess I'm concerned about some of the other passengers. She's particularly worried about the old preacher in wagon 12. She's seen him stumble twice during the brief rest stops, and his color has been growing more alarming with each passing hour. At the head of the caravan, Wade Garrett rides his horse with the easy confidence of a man who's crossed this desert dozens of times. Tall and lean, with skin like leather and eyes like chips of flint, he's built a profitable business transporting people west, and he's learned that profit comes from moving fast and caring little about individual hardship. Boss calls his second in command, a scarred man named Pike. Some of the folks are asking for extra water. That old preacher especially looks pretty bad. Garrett spits into the dust. They get their ration, same as everyone else. Start giving extra to every whiner, and we'll run dry before Tucson. Anyone who can't handle the heat shouldn't have bought passage across Arizona in summer. Pike nods, though something flickers across his face that might be conscience. What? If someone collapses? Then they learn to get up quick, or they get left behind. Garrett replies without emotion. This ain't a charity operation, Pike. We've got a schedule to keep and paying customers waiting in California. As if summoned by his callous words, a commotion erupts from the middle of the caravan. Shouts of alarm mix with the grinding halt of wagon wheels as the entire procession lurches to a stop. Ezra Whitman has finally succumbed to the heat. He lies crumpled in the sand beside wagon 12, his face gray beneath the sunburn, his breathing shallow and rapid. Mrs. Henderson kneels beside him, trying to fan him with her bonnet, while her son Tommy offers precious drops of water from his own meager supply. What's the holdup? Garrett's voice cracks like a whip as he rides back through the stopped wagons. It's the old preacher, Jacob explains, his accent thick with worry. He fall down, cannot get up. Is very sick, I think. Garrett dismounts and looks down at Ezra with the dispassionate assessment of a man evaluating livestock. The old man's pulse is thready, his skin burning hot but somehow clammy, his eyes rolled. Back showing mostly white. Heat stroke, Garrett diagnoses clinically. He's done for. Mrs. Henderson looks up with desperate hope. If we could get him some shade, some extra water. We don't have extra water. Garrett cuts her off. And we sure as hell don't have. Time to play nursemaid to someone who's going to die anyway. A murmur of shock ripples through the gathered passengers. Even by frontier standards, Garrett's coldness is breathtaking. You can't just leave him here, protests Tommy Anderson, his young voice cracking. Garrett's smile is without warmth. Watch. Me, boy. Anyone who wants to stay and tend to the old man is welcome to. Course, the next water's still 6 hours away, and there won't be another caravan through here for weeks. Elizabeth Morrison has been listening to this exchange with growing horror. She's seen cruelty before, the casual dismissal of servants, the indifference of the wealthy to the poor, but this is different. This is a man's life being weighed against a travel schedule. The other passengers look away, ashamed but helpless. They have families to think of, their own survival to consider. The desert doesn't care about moral principles, and dead heroes help no one. Garrett remounts his horse. Load up, he shouts. We're burning daylight, and daylight costs money. As the wagons begin to roll again, Ezra Whitman lies alone in the sand, abandoned to die under the merciless Arizona sun. His breathing grows more labored with each passing moment, and the vultures that have been circling high overhead begin to descend in lazy spirals. The chapter ends with Elizabeth Morrison, watching the old man shrink into the distance behind them, her hands clenched into fists and her mind racing toward a decision that will change everything. When privilege meets purpose, Elizabeth Morrison's hands shake with rage as she watches Ezra Whitman's still form disappear into the heat haze behind them. Around her, the other passengers avoid eye contact, their shame palpable, but their fear of Garrett stronger than their consciences. Miss Collins, Margaret Wells whispers urgently, you mustn't interfere. These people ... This isn't our world. We can't save everyone. But Elizabeth has heard enough. Rising from her cushioned seat, she calls out in a voice that carries over, the rumble of wagon wheels and the groaning of leather harnesses. Stop this caravan immediately. Garrett, riding 50 yards ahead, either doesn't hear or chooses to ignore her. Elizabeth's voice rises to a commanding shout that would make her banker father proud. I said stop. Wade Garrett, halt this caravan right now. This time, the authority in her tone cuts through the desert air like a blade. Garrett reins in his horse and turns, his face dark with annoyance. Lady, I don't know who you think you are, but I know exactly who I am, Elizabeth interrupts, stepping down from her wagon with fluid grace, despite the brutal heat. The question is whether you know who you're dealing with. She reaches into her traveling case and produces a leather portfolio, from which she extracts several official documents. The papers are crisp and bear impressive seals that catch the sunlight. My name is not Sarah Collins, she announces, her voice carrying to every passenger in the caravan. I am Elizabeth Morrison, daughter of Charles Morrison, president of Morrison Continental Bank and principal investor in the Southwestern Transportation Company. A ripple of shock runs through the gathered travelers. Margaret Wells closes her eyes in resignation, knowing that her employer has just thrown away every carefully constructed protection. Garrett's expression shifts from annoyance to calculation. The Southwestern Transportation Company holds the government contracts for half the freight movement in Arizona territory. Cross them, and a man's business could dry up faster than a puddle in the desert sun. Now see here, Miss Morrison, Garrett begins, his tone suddenly much more respectful. If you'd told me who you were from the start, you would have treated me differently than you treat everyone else? Elizabeth's eyes flash with contempt. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Garrett. Your character is measured by how you treat people when you think they can't fight back. She gestures toward the trail behind them, where Ezra Whitman lies dying in the sand. That man paid you his life, savings for safe passage to California. Instead, you've left him to die because his suffering is inconvenient to your schedule. Pike, Garrett's second in command, shifts uncomfortably in his saddle. Several of the other passengers begin to murmur agreement, emboldened by having someone with real power finally speaking for them. Miss Morrison, Garrett tries again, you don't understand the realities of desert travel. Sometimes hard choices. The only hard choice here is whether you turn this caravan around to collect Mr. Whitman, or whether I send a telegram from Tucson to my father detailing exactly how the Southwestern Transportation Company's freight contracts are being managed. The threat lands like a physical blow. Garrett's weather-beaten face goes pale beneath his tan. Losing those contracts would mean bankruptcy, and everyone in the territory knows that Charles Morrison has the influence to make that happen with a single conversation. Now hold on, Garrett says, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. There's no need for threats. If you feel so strongly about the old man, I'm sure we can work something out. Elizabeth steps closer to Garrett's horse, and despite the heat, her presence seems to radiate a cold authority that makes the caravan leader lean back in his saddle. Mr. Garrett, let me be very clear about something. This isn't a negotiation. You have exactly two choices. Turn this caravan around right now and collect Mr. Whitman with all the medical attention we can provide, or explain to my father why his transportation investments are being managed by someone who leaves paying customers to die in the desert. The silence stretches taut as a wire. Every eye in the caravan is fixed on this confrontation between the powerful young woman and the man who's held their lives in his hands for days. Finally, Garrett breaks. Pike, he barks. Take 2 men and 3 horses. Ride back for the preacher. And bring extra water. As Pike and his companions gallop back toward the abandoned Ezra, Elizabeth turns to address the rest of the caravan. Furthermore, she announces, there will be immediate changes to how this expedition is managed. She produces a second set of papers from her portfolio. I'm exercising my family's contractual authority to assume operational oversight of this caravan. Effective immediately, water rations will be increased, rest stops will be extended during the hottest part of the day, and any passenger requiring medical attention will receive it. Garrett's jaw works silently. He's been outmaneuvered completely, his authority stripped away by someone with more money and better connections than he could ever hope to possess. The additional costs, he begins weakly, will be covered by the Morrison Continental Bank, Elizabeth cuts him off. Consider it an investment in proper customer service. Margaret Wells finally finds her voice. Miss Morrison, Elizabeth? Your father will be furious when he learns you've revealed yourself. Elizabeth turns to her companion with a sad smile. Perhaps, but I'd rather face his anger than live with the memory of watching a good man die, because I was too cowardly too. Use the privileges I was born with. In the distance, Pike's rescue party is visible as small figures against the endless desert, racing to reach Ezra before it's too late. Elizabeth shades her eyes against the sun, watching them and silently, praying that her intervention hasn't come too late. Mrs. Henderson approaches hesitantly, her son Tommy beside her. Miss Morrison, thank you. What you did. It takes real courage. No, Mrs. Henderson, Elizabeth replies quietly. Real courage is what you showed, trying to help Mr. Whitman when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose. I just happen to have been born with advantages that make speaking up easier. The chapter ends with the rescue party returning. Ezra Whitman draped unconscious across a horse, but still breathing, while Elizabeth Morrison stands transformed from a pampered banker's daughter into someone who has discovered that true power isn't about what you can take, but about what you choose to give. Healing in the shadow of truth, the makeshift shelter Elizabeth has ordered constructed provides blessed relief from the killing sun. Canvas stretched between wagon poles creates a pocket of shade where Ezra Whitman lies on blankets, his breathing still labored, but growing stronger with each hour that passes. Elizabeth kneels beside him, carefully spooning water between his cracked lips while Margaret Wells applies cool, damp cloths to his burning forehead. The transformation in the caravan's atmosphere is palpable. Where once there was resigned desperation, now there's cautious hope. His color's improving, observes Mrs. Henderson, who has proven surprisingly knowledgeable about treating heat. Exhaustion. Back in Kansas, I lost my husband to a heat stroke. Mr. Whitman's got a fighting chance, thanks to you. Elizabeth shakes her head. Thanks to all of us. I just had the luxury of being able to speak up without fearing the consequences. Wade Garrett stands 20 feet away, his expression a mixture of resentment and calculation. He's been stripped of his authority, but not his cunning, and Elizabeth can practically see him searching for a way to regain control of the situation. Miss Morrison, he calls out, his tone carefully respectful, but with an edge underneath. I've been thinking about our new arrangements. While I appreciate your concern for passenger welfare, I wonder if you've considered the practical implications. Elizabeth doesn't look up from tending to Ezra, but her voice carries clearly. Enlighten me, Mr. Garrett. Well, extending rest stops and increasing water rations will add at least 3 days to our journey. 3 extra days in the desert with limited supplies. He pauses dramatically. What happens when the food runs out? When we're stranded between water holes with 43 people, depending on what's left in our barrels? A murmur of unease ripples through the nearby passengers. Garrett's words carry the weight of experience, and even those grateful for Elizabeth's intervention begin to look worried. Pike, who has been unusually quiet since the rescue, finally speaks up. Boss has a point, Miss Morrison. This desert don't forgive mistakes, no matter how good the intentions. Elizabeth finally looks up, her blue eyes meeting Garrett's steady gaze. She's been thinking about this very problem for the past 2 hours, and she has an answer that will surprise everyone. You're absolutely right, Mr. Garrett, which is why I've already sent a telegram to Tucson from the last relay station we passed. Garrett's eyes narrow. What kind of telegram? Elizabeth stands, brushing dust from her practical traveling dress. I've arranged for additional supplies to meet us at Widow's Creek. Extra water, food, medical supplies, and fresh horses. The cost will be covered by my family's accounts. The silence that follows this announcement is profound. Even Garrett seems momentarily speechless. Furthermore, Elizabeth continues, I've arranged for a proper physician to meet us there. Dr. Samuel Rodriguez from Tucson has agreed to travel out and examine not just Mr. Whitman, but anyone else who needs medical attention. Tommy Henderson's face lights up with amazement. You can just do that? Send messages and have people come running? Elizabeth's expression grows thoughtful. Money can accomplish many things, Tony. The question is whether it's used to help people or to exploit them. Her words carry an obvious barb directed at Garrett, who flushes red under his tan dot as the afternoon progresses, and Ezra begins to regain consciousness. Elizabeth finds herself in conversations with passengers she'd never really noticed before. Jakob, the German immigrant, tells her about the farm he's hoping to buy in California, while Mrs. Henderson shares her dreams of opening a boarding house near the coast. Each story reinforces what Elizabeth has begun to understand. These aren't just anonymous travelers. They're people with hopes, dreams, and families they're trying to reach. Garrett's callous efficiency has treated them like cargo, but there's so much more than that. Miss Morrison? Ezra's voice is weak, but clear as he finally awakens fully. Did someone say, Miss Morrison? Elizabeth moves to his side, smiling gently. Hello, Mr. Whitman. How are you feeling? Ezra's weathered hand reaches out to grasp hers. Better, thanks to you. But Morrison ... Are you related to Charles Morrison, the banker? He's my father. Ezra's eyes widen with recognition, and something like wonder. Your father ... He saved my church once. Back in Kansas, 15 years ago. The bank was going to foreclose on our mortgage, but Charles Morrison himself came to town and worked out new terms. Said a community needed its church more than his. Bank needed the profit. Elizabeth stares at the old man in surprise. Her father has always been a figure of stern business sense to her, not someone who made sentimental gestures. He said something I never forgot, Ezra continues, his voice growing stronger with the memory. He said that money without conscience is just arithmetic, but money with conscience can change the world. The words hit Elizabeth like a physical blow. She's heard her father say something similar, but she'd never really understood what he meant. Now, seeing the gratitude in Ezra's eyes and feeling the weight of responsibility that comes with real power, she begins to grasp the lesson. Margaret Wells approaches quietly. Elizabeth, you realize what you've done, don't you? Word of this will reach your father eventually. Your identity is no longer secret. Elizabeth nods slowly. I know, and I think that might be for the best. I've been running away from who I am, trying to escape the expectations that come with the Morrison name. But maybe the real question isn't how to escape those expectations, but how to live up to them. As evening approaches and the temperature finally begins to drop from unbearable to merely oppressive, the transformed caravan settles into its new rhythm. Guards are posted, dinner is prepared with more generous portions, and for the first time in days, there's actual conversation around the cook fires instead of exhausted silence. Wade Garrett sits apart from the others, his authority diminished, but his mind still working. He's lost this battle, but he's already planning for the future. Someone with Elizabeth Morrison's naivety won't always be around to protect the weak, and when she's gone, things will return to the way they've always been. But as he watches Elizabeth, moving among the passengers, checking on the sick, listening to their stories, and treating each person with genuine respect, a troubling thought begins to form in his mind. What if she's right? What if there's actually more profit in treating people with dignity than in exploiting their desperation? The chapter ends with Ezra Whitman sitting up for the first time since his collapse, sharing stories of Elizabeth's father with anyone who will listen, while Elizabeth herself stares out at the star-filled desert sky, finally understanding that Sometimes the greatest journey isn't the one that takes you away from home, but the one that helps you discover who you were meant to be all along. Where mercy plants seeds of change. 2 weeks later, the transformed caravan rolls into Los Angeles under a gentle California sun, a far cry from the brutal furnace they left behind in Arizona. The city spreads before them like a promise fulfilled. Orange groves, palm trees, and the distant sparkle of the Pacific Ocean visible beyond the rolling hills. Elizabeth Morrison sits beside Ezra Whitman in the lead wagon, both of them changed by their desert journey in ways that go deeper than the faded sunburns and travel-worn clothes. The old preacher has not only survived, but thrived under the improved conditions, becoming an unofficial chaplain and counselor to their small community of travelers. There, Ezra points with a trembling but steady hand toward a small white house, surrounded by fruit trees. That's where my sister Mary lives. I never thought I'd see it again. Elizabeth follows his gaze and smiles. The house looks like something from a fairy tale after the harsh realities of desert travel, with flowers blooming in neat beds and children playing in the shade of a large oak tree. Behind them, the caravan has become something unprecedented. A traveling community where the strong help the weak and everyone looks out for each other. Wade Garrett still leads the expedition, but his methods have been permanently altered by Elizabeth's intervention and the undeniable success of treating passengers as human beings rather than cargo. Miss Morrison, calls Mrs. Henderson from the wagon behind them. I can't thank you enough for what you've done. Tommy and we never would have made it without your kindness. Tommy Henderson, now sun-browned and confident after proving himself capable during the improved journey, grins and waves. Miss Morrison, will you really help Ma get started with her boarding house? Elizabeth nods. I've already written to my father's business associates in Los Angeles. There will be financing available at fair terms, and I suspect a boarding house run by someone with your mother's character will do very well. As the wagons draw to a halt in the town's main square, Elizabeth is surprised to see a familiar figure. Waiting for her, a tall, distinguished man in an expensive suit who can only be her father, Charles Morrison. Elizabeth. His voice carries a mixture of relief, concern, and something that might be pride. Father. Elizabeth steps down from the wagon with the easy grace she's developed during weeks of frontier travel. I'm surprised to see you here. Charles. Morrison looks around at the collection of grateful passengers now disembarking, at Ezra Whitman being helped down by willing hands, at the obvious camaraderie that has developed among people who started as strangers. Your telegram was illuminating, he says carefully. When you wrote about assuming operational authority over a transportation contract and authorizing emergency expenditures, I decided I needed to see for myself what my daughter had accomplished. Wade Garrett approaches nervously, clearly uncomfortable, in the presence of such obvious wealth and power. Mr. Morrison, sir, about the additional expenses your daughter authorized will be fully covered by Morrison Continental Bank. Charles interrupts smoothly. Furthermore, I'm pleased to announce that the Southwestern Transportation Company has decided to adopt your daughter's passenger care protocols as standard practice across all our contracted routes. Garrett stares in amazement. Sir? Charles? Morrison's smile is sharp as a blade. It seems, Mr. Garrett, that treating people with dignity is not only morally superior, but also more profitable. Word of this caravan's success has already reached potential customers. We have more booking requests for westward passage than we can accommodate. Elizabeth watches this exchange with growing understanding. Her father hasn't come to California to scold her for revealing her identity or overstepping her authority. He's come to learn from what she's accomplished. Elizabeth, Charles continues, I have a proposition for you. Morrison Continental is expanding into passenger transportation services. We need someone to oversee operations, someone who understands both the business side and the human cost of travel. Someone who has proven they can make hard decisions. Under pressure. You're offering me a job? Elizabeth asks in surprise. I'm offering you a partnership. Morrison & Morrison Transportation Company has a nice ring to it, don't you think? Before Elizabeth can respond, a commotion erupts near Ezra. Whitman's wagon. An elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes is embracing the old preacher with tears streaming down her face. Ezra. Oh, Ezra, we thought you died on the road. When your letters stopped coming. Mary. Ezra's voice is thick with emotion. I almost did die. But this young lady... He turns toward Elizabeth with shining eyes. This angel saved my life and the lives of everyone on this caravan. Elizabeth finds herself surrounded by grateful passengers, each wanting to thank her. One last time before they scatter to begin their new lives. Jakob, the German immigrant, presses a small wooden cross into her hands, carved during the long evenings around the campfire. Mrs. Henderson hugs her like a daughter, while Tommy salutes her with the mock-serious dignity of a young man who has seen real courage in action. As the crowd begins to disperse, Elizabeth walks with her father toward the hotel where he's staying. The California evening is mild and pleasant, a sharp contrast to the brutal heat that nearly claimed so many lives just days ago. I'm proud of you, Charles says quietly, not just for what you accomplished, but for how you did it. Using power to protect rather than exploit. That's what real strength looks like. Elizabeth thinks about Wade Garrett, who had approached her privately before they reached Los Angeles. To her surprise, he'd thanked her, not just for the business that her changes had brought to his operation, but for showing him a better way to treat the people who trusted him with their lives. Father, she says thoughtfully, about that arranged. Marriage you wanted me to consider. Charles Morrison chuckles. Elizabeth, after what you've accomplished out here, do you really think I'd try to force you into a marriage with a man who's never proven himself capable of anything more challenging than inheriting his father's money? The next morning brings a steady stream of visitors to Elizabeth's hotel. Former passengers stop by to share news of jobs found, housing secured, and dreams beginning to take shape. Ezra Whitman arrives with his sister Mary, both of them glowing with the joy of family reunited. Miss Morrison, Ezra says, pressing a worn leather Bible into her hands. This belonged to my father and his father before him. I want you to have it, not because you need religion, but because you've already learned its most important lesson. What lesson is that? Elizabeth asks. Ezra's smile is radiant. That we're all traveling the same road, and the strong are meant to help the weak. You understood it when it most? 6 months later, Elizabeth Morrison stands on the platform of the new Morrison & Morrison Transportation Depot in Tucson, watching passengers board the first luxury coach service between Arizona and California. The coaches are equipped with proper water supplies, medical kits, and trained staff who understand that every passenger deserves dignity and care. Wade Garrett approaches, now wearing the uniform of a Morrison & Morrison route supervisor. His demeanor has changed completely. Where once there was callous efficiency, now there's genuine concern for passenger welfare. Miss Morrison, the afternoon departure is ready. Full capacity and every passenger properly equipped for desert travel. Elizabeth nods approvingly. And the emergency protocols? All staff trained, extra supplies loaded, and Dr. Rodriguez on call in case of medical emergencies. Garrett pauses, then adds quietly, Miss Morrison, I want you to know what you did out there in the desert. It changed more than just company policy. It changed me. As the coach pulls away from the depot, Elizabeth waves to the passengers, beginning their own journeys toward new lives and fresh possibilities. In her pocket, she carries 2 treasures, Jacob's wooden cross and Ezra's father's Bible, reminders that sometimes the greatest adventures aren't about the destinations we reach, but about the people we become along the way. The story ends with a letter from Ezra Whitman, now helping his sister Mary run a small church in Los Angeles. He writes of former caravan passengers who have found success in California, of families reunited and dreams fulfilled, and of how a single act of courage in the desert heat has rippled outward to touch countless lives. You asked me once, the letter concludes, whether I believed in angels. I do now. They don't always have wings and halos. Sometimes they have blue eyes and banker's daughter's determination, and they show up exactly when mercy is needed most. Outside her office window, Elizabeth watches another coach depart for the California coast, carrying travelers who will be treated with dignity and care because one young woman refused to let an old man die alone in the desert. The Arizona sun still blazes overhead, but it no longer seems merciless. Just another challenge to be met with courage, compassion, and the understanding that true strength is measured by how we treat those who need our help the most.